All right, not at all. All right, and should we exit our closed session? Should we do?
Yes.
Should we,
now let's invite everyone back in. Yes.
Let's invite everyone. We're back over to the hello, everybody. All right, so what I think I tried to resist hitting on this topic. In the specifics of this topic are, but you know what? I'm going to tack right into it.
We got lucky. I just want to point out we got
lucky.
Oh,
we did get lucky. You're right. We got lucky.
We got lucky because we had Andres on. And that was a great distraction. Andres was terrific.
Terrific, yes.
And I don't have to tell people to go listen to that because everyone did. I can see in the data. And then we had the Ballers founders on. And I will tell everyone to go listen to that one because I can tell that you didn't.
Oh, but those of you who did, we know you loved it. I actually, I was backpacking with my 19-year-old over the weekend, which is great. And we were listening to that podcast as we were backpacking. It was very great. He was like, that was a really good discussion. You really enjoyed it. So it's fun.
So I will tell you, Brian,
I think it was great. And I'll tell you that listen doesn't show up in your numbers, Mr. I've got all the numbers. So there.
Well, not only my folks listened to both the XZ and the one with Andres and the Ballers podcast, but also Bill George, scorer of the longest game in baseball history, listened to the podcast. So we got a new listener.
My goodness, that is awesome. What do you think? Did he?
He loved it. Of course, we talked about him. He loved it.
Did this actually happen, or are you
100%?
Telling me
it happened.
This is bringing great joy into my life. I feel like I've been touched by a celebrity. Great. A celebrity I've already met, but I feel like I've been touched in a different way. This was very flattering. I feel
it's very exciting.
I mean, the scorekeeper of the longest game in baseball listened to our least listened podcast episode ever. I mean, that's awesome. Great.
Yes, but our days of being lucky are over.
So we were lucky because you're right, because we had basically these pre-booked slots while this whole mess was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think what we should do, which we have not always done, is provide context for the mess.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Because I was re-listening to the episode in which we were trolled by the Nate Silver tweet. We may need to go need to go inject in the recording a reading of that tweet. I'm just like,
what the
read
fuck
the
are we
tweet,
talking about
you
at all?
Will one of you jackasses please read the entire tweet aloud? But we're like too trolled to even read the tweet aloud. Not that we need to do an entire reading of Matt Essay's terrible story, but at least describe what it is and how events unfolded.
That's why we're here. I mean, much like we did for the New York Times. I mean, I feel like we did them the dignity of reading our most hated piece. But
yes, we did them. We did our future selves the benefit of an out loud reading of Kevin Roose's absolutely terrible piece. Agreed.
That's right.
Kevin Roose, you're still on our mind. Go ahead, Adam.
That's right. So when was this now? Like 3 weeks ago. So we had a great episode, I thought, about OpenTofu. We had the OpenTofu founders on. For those, just to provide even more context, HashiCorp relicensed Terraform under the Buzel, these OpenTofu folks, mostly from corporate entities, mostly using Terraform code and so forth, forked it, got it into Linux Foundation, and that fork is cranking. Now, on the same day,
a great job. I think they've been doing a really, tough situation, really admirable job for the OpenTofu folks. They've been catalyzing the community. It just feels like it's going in all the right directions. Really grooving.
Absolutely. So my experience of this, of discovering this new incident, is Matt Assay's article. I think I saw it from Adam Jacob posting on Twitter.
Yeah.
And the title of the article is something like OpenTofu, maybe showing us how not to do open source or how not to do a fork. I'm like, okay, like what are we talking about here? What is going on? And he goes on to describe how it appears to him that OpenTofu has purloined code from Terraform. So Terraform has added some new feature called the removed block. And that same feature, compatible feature, has appeared in OpenTofu, which seems reasonable. You want to kind of keep a pace as you want to say to consumers of these things that there's compatibility. How sustainable that is, unclear. But same feature has appeared, and based on his analysis of the code, not only is the same feature, it's actually the same code. That the code was stolen, that the license was changed in the files, and that they have done this grievous act.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, that's exactly what he's saying. I mean, and his tweet. Not obviously, the tweet is going to deliberately be kind of clickbaity, but the tweet is really pretty outlandish. I mean, OpenTofu seems to have misappropriated HashiCorp's IP by removing the Bucel license notice and replacing it with the MPL. I like the fact that he misspelled the Bucel by chucking the U. It's like, you can't, come on, if you're gonna can you at least spell this license correctly? And it's really bad. And I actually DM'd him privately, Adam, because I would like to believe that one of the things I feel I have learned as I've gotten older is to exhaust all private options before resorting to public shaming.
It's a lesson that we all take decades to learn. Agreed. But yeah, totally. Like, it's much easier to have a rational conversation in private than when you're getting detonated, and everyone's instinct when getting blown up publicly is to dig in your heels.
And so I'm like, just privately, I was like, what is going on? This is like a super serious allegation. And you look at the files, and in this article, he's like, go look at the files. And Adam, I mean, it sounds like you did what I did, which is like, yeah, I did look at the files. I mean, did you look at the files? And you look at the files and you're like, it is not obvious to me that one of these was copied from the other, honestly. And there's a whole bunch of explanations that are possible, including that they have drawn that. And I mean, obviously it's first of all, it's Go. I mean, I know that, wow, that sounded really pejorative, didn't it? I didn't actually mean that to sound.
You want to try it again?
Let's see. Let me retake that. 3, 2, 1. I mean, it's written in Golang. Is that better?
Yeah, that was good. That was good.
All right. So, but this is a language that is like, there's a lot of replication in Go. And there's a lot of code that's going to look similar. And actually, you know what? In Go's defense, this is a feature of Go. From the creators of Go, they view this as a feature. And I think that you get readability, you get easy learnability, readability, because you've got these patterns that you're going to see all over the place.
Yeah.
And when I looked at that, I'm like, this looks about as similar or as different as I would expect Go code to look, given that these things are implementing similar functionality.
Yeah. So there are only 2 Go code bases I've really been in. One of them is Terraform, and I'm like, all of Terraform looks like this. Every file I've ever looked in Terraform, in any of the providers, any of the core, it all sort of has this mouthfeel to it. So what are we talking about here?
I do love the mouthfeel. Use of mouthfeel is excellent. Let me check that off on my Oxide and Friends bingo card. Yep, I got mouthfeel. There we go. Okay,
perfect.
I think I'm gonna get bingo today. But if someone could just say cackle bladder, use cackle bladder in conversation, I'm gonna.
Oh, it's been years since we worked that one in, but man, what an episode!
Oh, we worked it in so well though. It's cackle bladder's coming back. But so you looked at the code, I looked at the code. It's like, this is kind of a crazy allegation, and like, where is this coming from? But stands by the piece. I mean, and so I would say that my advanced age has taught me to exhaust all diplomacy, but I proceed to exhaust all diplomatic options within like 24 hours. I'm like, all right, shaming it is. We've tried. Tried to do this the easy way, pal.
All right, now to plan A. Right.
Plan A, and of course that other part of me is like, well, are you happy with that? That's the diplomatic route was really successful.
It should be noted that also within 24 hours, I can't remember if this before or after, HashiCorp files a cease and desist against OpenTofu.
Did we know that at the time, or was that
I did not know that. I didn't understand the ordering of these things. But
I know we know that now because OpenTofu, the OpenTofu folks described the timeline. I'm not sure we knew that at the time, that they had sent a C&D when the article was first published. I think, and some of the OpenTofu folks in the chat are saying that we did not. So I think at the time we didn't know that.
Yeah.
And which to me makes this like way, way dirtier, honestly, this whole thing. It's like,
I mean, yes. Can I also just note about Matt? I say, works for MongoDB.
Yes.
As the head of DevRel is my understanding.
That's right.
And that is a very conflicted position
It's
in
a
this
very conflicted
discussion,
position. Yeah, it
right?
really
Because
is.
MongoDB went through, I think, what is arguably a very similar license and change.
That's right.
So, and so to kind of be espousing all of these opinions without that being front and center. I mean, to me, you should like that. That should just you should just recuse yourself from the
You should recuse
conversation.
yourself. You should not be weighing in. I agree.
Because
And
there's just 100% of you have so much economic incentive here. It's just impossible to be impartial, and to not have that be front and center was just gone.
or at the very least, put it on a blog entry. You know what I mean? Like put it in a publishing vessel where it is very clearly Mongo's position, or it is your personal position. But it's operating in this kind of interstitial land where it seems to be an info world, not even an op-ed, but an article. And people would be reasonable. It's a reasonable inference.
This is from the hard news wing of InfoWorld, not the opinion wing.
This is from the InfoWorld Foreign Bureau in Moscow. This is the Peter Jennings coming to us from InfoWorld. Yeah, this is the hard-hitting journalism of InfoWorld, but it's not an unreasonable assumption that this is like actual journalism when it is at best an unlabeled op-ed, and it's an op-ed that is very conflicted and really should be on a personal blog. I mean, put it on your blog entry, dude. It's like, which is also fine, but at least you're not lending this kind of additional credence to it on really this very, very serious allegation. And so this kind of thing was sitting out there, and there were a lot of people. I mean, you presumably also read the Hacker News comments on this thing, which were all like a bunch of people. Because I was like, all right, I am curious to read the Hacker News comments. People are going to go into this. Am I missing something? And everyone's kind of going into it and coming out with the same conclusion, which is like, I'm not seeing it here. I do not see how one was copied from the other. And I mean, I'm telling Matt privately, it's like, go look at you don't have a technologist that agrees with you. Does that bother you at all? I mean, it's like every technologist that's going into this in depth is coming away with the same conclusion, which is, I don't see it. Certainly, I don't see it to the level of this kind of allegation. I mean, if you want to ask a question, I guess, but you're not asking a question. You're basically leveling an accusation, and seems pretty serious. So when it was
really serious,
yeah. And then we had the response from, the OpenTofu response, which was, I got to say, a great response. I mean, OpenTofu folks, you can be restrained, so we don't have to be, because your restraint is really admirable in this, where really going through laboriously. Because the other thing is like, wait a minute, like, what's the motive here? I mean, the idea that, and did you read the C&D? So they post then the whole timeline, and OpenTofu posts the HashiCorp C&D. And I mean, did you?
I only looked at it briefly. It looked almost like a PR. Like it looked like just a diff, but maybe there was more.
Oh, it more or less is. I mean, the C&D is comical. I mean, it is so bad. And there's no, I mean, it's very clear that this whole thing and this whole, the terrible piece by Matt and the OpenTofu C&D, like, or the C&D sent to OpenTofu is very clearly designed to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And this is like classic FUD, I feel, Adam. This is something we've seen in the industry for a long time. I feel like FUD has existed as long as we've had computers, more or less. It's like we have had FUD, and I don't know what your definition of FUD has been historically, but I feel like there is an important, because FUD, I feel, is not merely using kind of the abstract fears to go compete or kind of say disparaging things about your competitor. To me, it has a little more of a specific meaning. Be curious if it has kind of the same implications for you. But for me, it is about an entrenched competitor trying to compete against an upstart by sowing fear about that upstart. There needs to be that kind of that power imbalance to be like really pure high grade FUD, like the pure stuff.
And it's not sort of I mean, maybe this is the nature of fear and nature of FUD, but it's not rational, and it's meant to appeal to people's personal irrationality too. Where we say, "Look, OpenTofu looks good. Am I going to get fired? Are there going to be implications for me personally if I advocate these kinds of technology choices?" So
Right.
I think it's intended to almost speak to unvoiced opinions, right? It's not like the kind of objection that you might hear aloud, but it's meant to plant very subtly these hard to overcome hurdles.
That's right. And the truth, to a certain degree, the truth doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
the point is the fear, not the facts. Like the F definitely does not stand for facts. And what you are trying to do is get people to ask questions, kind of these emotional questions, and you don't even want to. It doesn't matter what the actual truth is. And in this case, like the fact that, and you wonder if, from a Hashi perspective, it doesn't matter that OpenTofu has been vindicated by the facts. If from their perspective, it's like, well, we did what we intended to do, which is we've got this kind of this abstract fear out there.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
I mean,
so you're saying maybe they view this even the refutation as mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
If I do a casual Googling and I say, hey, OpenTofu and Terraform and Matt Isay's article pops up, and I see the headline, I say, whoa, okay, like don't need to learn any more about that, even though Matt has now sort of updated the article to include some additional information, being as kind as I can.
Well, okay, so be less kind. Okay, now do it again. I want you to do it again, but now, right. but without quite so much kindness.
Yeah, I want to pull up the exact quote on that, because let's see. It says, since this article was published, HashiCorp sent OpenTofu a cease and desist on April 3rd, expressing in greater detail the concerns raised.
Okay,
on April 11th.
Okay, so hold on, stop. Like, you're in the first sentence of an apology. This does not sound like an apology so far.
Right.
So
this
far,
definitely feels like
this sounds like, it feels like
it's more of an update than an apology.
More of an update than an apology. Like, look, okay, look, I've had plenty of BS apologies. I've had plenty of insincere apologies in my life. I know what it looks like when it's more of an update than an apology.
I was a kid. I've had kids.
Right. I know how to use the passive voice. Come on.
That's right. On April 11th, OpenTofu maintainers responded with a detailed analysis of claims made about the removed block. Based on these documents, it appears that the OpenTofu community did not misappropriate HashiCorp's intellectual property.
Okay.
Like, come on.
Okay. First of all, then you got like the double negative in there, right? I mean, just like if you really wanted to, really take it apart, it feels like, that you are still leaving like OpenTofu, misappropriate, HashiCorp, and intellectual property are all in the same sentence together still.
That's right. Headline unchanged, like subheading unchanged, like URL certainly still unchanged. I don't know. It's just way not enough.
It's definitely not enough to me. I mean, and I can understand why, the OpenTofu folks, maybe even the LF to a certain degree, because I got to tell you, like I was just like lit up by this. I'm like, this is which one's written? Is slander written or libel written? Why can't I remember this?
I think libel is written. Chat, help us out here.
Yeah, I mean, with whichever one of those. I think libel's written, right? Yeah, libel's written. Sorry. So, yeah, like this is libel, right? I mean, to me, this is like the fact that you're leaving this thing up is like, it's libel. It's damaging. It is continuing to damage OpenTofu. And I can understand why the OpenTofu folks, who are much more reasonable than I am on this and much more forgiving than I am, and hey, better human beings as a result. But I can understand why they're like, all right, look, we've kind of got this thing. But this is where like I am the Curtis LeMay of open source. I'm like, drop the nuke. I mean, let's go put the bombers aloft Linux Foundation. This is what the LF is for. And there should be consequences for HashiCorp for this.
Yeah.
And like you should not be able to come to LF events. You should, I mean, like there are things that they could go do to punish HashiCorp for this.
I mean, why don't they just charge them more? Wouldn't that be in keeping with DLF?
Oh, now see, I knew I phrased this the wrong way with them. Of course, this is why I don't listen to Curtis LeMay. This is why I should have been like,
bombing opportunity. It's a revenue opportunity.
It's a repricing opportunity. God, you're so good. Why am I? I'm so naive. Yeah, they should. I mean, at least be like, wait a minute. So there's platinum tier. There's crooked tier. What's crooked tier? Oh no.
Now there's libelous tier. Okay,
well,
tell me more.
Tier. Tell me. Okay, do I have to? So wait a minute. But I get a larger booth if I'm libelous as well. It's like, well, yes, we throw that in as well. If you're libelous, you actually get a larger booth. You get more passes if you're libelous. You know, that's a much better way to phrase it. But they seem to be like satisfied with the way this has ended, which is, I think it's not okay, because this attack is so poorly grounded. And it just reminds me of all of these attacks, of these kind of FUD attacks on upstarts, on new ideas, on new things, on disruptive innovation. And these attacks are basically always wrong. You know, I mean, and there's a question in the chat about the to what degree this is fallout from the Sun Microsoft IP lawsuit from years ago. And I think that there is I mean, to me, actually, it is more the thing that this reminds me more of are the Halloween documents inside of Microsoft about open source. And the disparagement of open source, and just the FUD that has been. So let's turn the way back to on FUD though. Let's maybe it's a way of cooling ourselves off. If we bring ourselves back to Amdahl, is that going to work? No.
Please, just to Amdahl. I was googling FUD earlier, and I found the term referenced in some 17th century text. So
that is just awesome.
It was.
That's even better.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to milkshake duck this 17th century document, and I think they had the terms in a different order. But that was. But Amdahl, I think, is the contemporary, modern, technical origin, as far as I know.
Yes. So, and this is in reference to IBM selling against Amdahl, and the Amdahl's the upstart, and Gene Amdahl has left IBM. Believes that, hey, we can make a faster, IBM is, by insisting on doing everything in microcode, IBM is making this thing unnecessarily slow. We can make it faster by putting more of these instructions in silicon and taking them out of microcode. And IBM is, as a tactic against Amdahl, IBM is using the fear of Amdahl, and in particular, they are the fear of what IBM might do and of what the incompatibility will mean, because Amdahl is trying to be compatible with with System 360 and or System 370, I guess at that point.
Yeah, right.
And IBM is indicating like, hey, we're going to change our instruction sets kind of arbitrarily, and Amdahl, is never going to. Amdahl is an unsafe option. Amdahl has, it may be faster, but by the way, we IBM, like we're going to make something that's faster, and they kind of pre-announce things, and there's kind of this vaporware angle. And this is where Amdahl either coins or resurrects, depending on which text I guess you're going to. Resurrects from the old, from Chaucer, I guess, according to your source. But resurrects the idea of FUD, of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And we certainly have seen that a lot. I feel like, what are some of the times we've seen it in our careers?
Oh, good. That's a terrific question.
Because I feel like
you give an example?
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel that we have seen. I mean, I feel like litigation is used often for this, right? I think that NetApp was infamous for and NetApp had a lawsuit against BlueArc, and that was very much designed to sow FUD. There was the SCO case, certainly.
Yeah.
where and that was absolutely being used. I mean, that was being used by Sun too to sow FUD about the IP that was potentially in Linux that had been misappropriated into Linux. And
but you're right with NetApp. Like I definitely experienced it with the CFS lawsuit. I'd visit customers and they'd kind of ask about it, like clearly, independent of any of the details or whatever, that was breaking through, right? It was sowing that doubt to say, okay, like, do I really want to take this risk, or what I now perceive to be a risk?
Yeah, and it's always kind of interesting when you have one of these actions like NetApp initiating this Blue Arc lawsuit, where all of a sudden it's appearing like, how do all of their customers somehow know about this? Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, that's who the audience was. The audience is actually like, yeah, sorry, Blue Arc, you're just kind of like roadkill here. Like, you're not actually, you NetApp are not actually trying to litigate against Blue Arc. You're trying to send a message to all would-be startups and to your existing customers that that they should be afraid of adopting anything else because you NetApp are going to litigate against them, and you're going to use litigation as a tool. And they certainly did that. I mean, obviously they did, and then they did that later against us, against Sun. And so I think that's the use of litigation is often an indicator that FUD is being used.
Another one that I don't know if this feels similar to you, but Windows NT. Like in the late 90s, the Windows NT, put this in the kind of the vaporware category, was just going to be all things to all people. Everything else was dead. It was a terrifically effective marketing campaign in that, like, folks really believed it. Like, I believed it. I was a student and I was believing the hype. And I'm sure really put the hurt on a lot of Unix competitors at the time.
Oh, for sure. When I think that also the fear that you're creating is a very concrete fear, which is the functionality is just going to be incorporated into Windows. And if you've got on the personal computing side and then on the NT side, yeah, for sure they were. And I think the FUD that Microsoft was using was, I think, less against the proprietary Unices, although maybe that a little bit too, but then especially against Linux. I mean, there was definitely there was all sorts of FUD that Microsoft was engaged in. And this could be kind of Halloween docs go into some of their specific tactics, but it was all about creating of open source and fear that open source was going to be less secure, fear that it was going to be that if you ran open source software, that you would then have this kind of unbounded liability because of this mysterious IP that was in there, and the owner of the IP would sue you as a user. I mean, it was just like, it was lots of abstract fears around that.
Yeah. I feel like I've got a lot of suppressed or like repressed FUD memories. As you're talking, it's all coming back. When I was at Delphix, we were building a virtual appliance on top of ZFS to provision Oracle databases. And all of a sudden we heard from all of our customers were Oracle customers. Oracle owns ZFS. And our customers started saying things like, well, doesn't Oracle own ZFS? And isn't that a problem for you? And aren't you just a GUI on top of ZFS? And clearly, like, this was FUD being generated. We eventually got like some PowerPoint document that someone had accidentally given to a customer, handed to us. And we saw the way that they were FUDding us, the way they were disparaging, not head-to-head technology. In some cases, not even technology that existed, but stuff that they were maybe planning to do. And, were there legal concerns that might, cause problems for the customers if they made those technology choices? It was really insidious.
Yeah, that is really insidious. And again, because it's like, because you're preying on fear. And it's like, I also feel that like it's another one of these where it's like the legal system is this kind of shadowy thing that's out there. You know what I mean? That's being used to feed this fear. I mean, as we're seeing in this case too, where it's like there's this C&D, and I mean, I think that someone in the chat is linking to this Joe Duffy piece, who very much is also, I mean, I guess to his credit, is posting this on LinkedIn, not as an InfoWorld op-ed or article, but also sowing a lot of fear around like, hey, all these developers are tainted. And HashiCorp is almost certainly patenting the stuff that OpenTofu is copying. And you're like, stop. Do you actually, sorry, stop. Like, are you, I mean, like, can we go substantiate that? It's like HashiCorp is almost certainly patenting the stuff OpenTofu is copying. That's like a pretty dangerous line. That's another one of these things. It's like, all right, this is like less malicious, for lack of a better word, than Matt Assay's piece, but it's still a super irresponsible thing to say, because it is the patent system was very grievously abused for a very long time. But then Rehnquist croaked, honestly, and we should do an episode on this. Honestly, Adam, we got to get on how, because I feel like this is one of these things that people don't really realize, is that the Rehnquist court didn't take a patent case for whatever it was, 3 decades, and then you have John Roberts, who comes in and is like, you know what, I'm like, we need to. There's a bunch of the technology has changed a bunch. And you have a bunch of courts that are interpreting what we said literally 30 years ago. And they took a bunch of patent cases that were 9-0 patent cases, which I think is like super interesting, right? I mean, so at the time, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Clarence Thomas agreed on something. You know what I mean? It's like whatever that is, like that's probably just right, whatever that, like you can kind of and the 9-0 Supreme Court cases are always interesting to me. And there were a couple of really important 9-0 Supreme Court cases that really changed the way we think of patentability. And the eBay case, KSR Teleflex changed what the obvious test is. The obvious test was being interpreted to be, is this obvious to a stranger on the street? It's like, nothing's obvious to a stranger on the street. So everything is patentable, and everything was getting patented. But I think that this claim that Duffy's making is that HashiCorp is almost certainly patenting the stuff that OpenTofu. They almost actually certainly are not patenting the stuff. You would really want to take that apart. You would want to go look at what their patent portfolio looks like, and it is actually, to me, exceedingly unlikely that they are patenting the stuff. First of all, anything that they would patent, they would. This is actually where it gets super interesting into like what the Busel. Where the actual terms of the Busel are, because by the time that patent comes through, I mean, your public disclosure will be, the public disclosure starts a clock, and because they are still making this stuff available under the Busel, it's going to complicate their own patent process. I'll put it that way. And that's assuming that they're still patenting things, which is, they probably aren't. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and it doesn't have much value, or nearly as much value as it had like back in the day with the NTP case and RIM and all that stuff. It's like where the patent trolls could just go, it had kind of a hunting license. So I actually don't think, I think it is unlikely that they are, that there's a bunch of patent related stuff here. And also, I mean, of course, I guess I'm an old school in this regard too. It's like, if there is a bunch of stuff that's patented, I would go fight the patents, because you can probably get those patents are likely going to flunk the obvious test. Certainly the stuff that I looked at, I'm like,
well, I mean, the fact that the removed block, both in OpenTofu and Terraform seem to have copied the moved block. It does suggest that removed is not going to be non-obvious in the presence of moved. But
yes,
yeah,
and like go litigate that, you know. And I guess I'm back to being Curtis LeMay again. I guess I want to go. Somehow I got the bombers back aloft again. Well, this is why but they just need to pay more. They need to pay more. They need to. You have to pay the patent troll. You have to be in the patent troll category. Libelous patent troll. It's a different category of sponsorship for LF events. But so I think that is a fear that I would be very surprised to learn is substantiated. And obviously, like, sure, Oracle v. Google was bad news. And I think that like the OpenTofu folks, I would assume though that, I mean, whenever you're in a fork, you're going to be careful about you don't want to invite anything like this. So I would assume the OpenTofu folks are being very careful about what they're, I mean, and because this is the other thing is like, what's HashiCorp's motivation here? I mean, HashiCorp's motivation is very clearly to to imply that the fork itself, that there's illegality with the fork, which is just ridiculous.
Exactly.
So I've got here's my kind of thought on FUD as you kind of think about like FUD over the years, and again, litigation often involved, and you are trying to sow fear in customers of this thing that is disrupting the entrenched thing. So here's my after school special thought on FUD. I think like the real fear, uncertainty, and doubt resides with the entity that's sowing the FUD. What this is clearly HashiCorp is afraid of OpenTofu. Yeah. Clearly. And like, why would you do this if you were not afraid, deathly afraid, and suffering from your own uncertainty and your own doubt about the future? And you are, because you, HashiCorp, are so gripped by fear, the way you are expressing that fear is by attempting to sow that fear in OpenTofu. And I think if you look at FUD over the years, it's like that seems to be kind of a true, that seems to be kind of a theme.
Yeah. Well, you're right. And it's born of a competitive pressure where there's kind of a disparity in both directions. There's, on one hand, you've got entrenchment and power. And on the upstart side, you've got often a much more compelling case or better technology or whatever. So like with Amdahl, faster processors, much better price performance. And on the IBM side, nothing coming down the pike that was going to take them on for a while. So what do? Like, you don't, all of your kind of marketing tools go out the window, and what you're left with is just disparagement, effectively.
That's right. And I think that you look at Microsoft and open source, and I mean, deathly afraid of open source at a deep level. And as early as the mid 90s or late 90s, beginning to get very afraid of open source. And so, what do they do? They project their own fear on the world by sowing fear in open source.
Yeah. And okay. So on this topic of fear, and we mentioned how we had Andres on, we were talking about the XZ exploit and stuff. One of the things that has been so irritating about that is, we've talked on the show, we've talked elsewhere about how open source is tough, how you have folks out there who are often volunteers contributing time, you're not really recognizing effectively compensation commensurate with the value that they're creating. And that's never going to be a perfect conversion, but in some cases, they're creating a lot of value and getting nothing in return. And often they're fine with that. Sometimes they're not, but either way, it's tough. What kills me is the folks who see this XZ situation and say, ergo, things like the Busel are inevitable. That the only way that that open source is broken, and we can actually agree on some of the ways that it's broken, but they're using that as a way to FUD and disparage, in fact, open source, like true open source licenses, and saying yes, and then using it as an opportunity to say these source available things are actually the version that works. And it just kills me. It kills me to see that argument kind of on the back of this great event this great find by Andres, and this magnifying lens on a real problem.
Yeah, but though I think that this idea of putative open source companies fudding open source, I actually think is not new.
Yeah.
No, I think because I think that this, if you go back to Assay's employer, Mongo, and the kind of some of the first dual licensing models where it's like, this thing is going to be under the AGPL unless you get a license from us, in which case, and then they've incentivized themselves to give you fear of the AGPL. In fact, if there were a crazier license in the AGPL, they'd use that one. You know what I mean? Like they want no, I want a license that you can use this, but you have to make sounds like a duck if you use it. So like that's what I want.
I was once working on selling a product to Apple, and they needed to know if anything inside the box had AGPL, because if it did, they couldn't buy it.
Right.
Oh wow, okay.
Is there a single drop of crazy in here? And and they probably have like talking points from Mongo about like, accept 0 drops of AGPL, and you're like, you do not want any of that crazy. It's like, aren't you? What?
Did you choose this crazy?
Did you choose this?
Weren't you serving crazy just like 20 minutes ago? Weren't you like saying how tasty it was?
I'm serving crazy to crazy people. Are you a crazy person? I mean, that's the crazy side of the bar. You don't want that. You want, you look like you're an enterprise kind of.
Yeah, you're more of a source available type.
You're more a source available type. I can see based on the money you've got coming out of your pockets. I can, that to me, what that says? That says, I don't like crazy. I like paying for source available. And I think that this is not new, unfortunately. And I think it's really tough. And, Adam has said this before too. Adam Jacobs, it's just like, it's really tough to make it as an open source company where you're a software product company and it's all open source. And like, we've got, Oxide, we've got a tremendous luxury that like the thing we actually make is the computer, and it makes it really easy. And, Amazon has it easy too. It's like the thing that we actually make is the service. And
yeah, or even the thing you make is the service.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, which I realize is part of the problem, but
right. For arbitrary you.
Yeah.
But I mean, just we've got this kind of monetization vector for the software that allows us to actually open this stuff up. And so I think that this is a real challenge of these pure open source companies. And I think that like, this is like, we can expect, I think, more of this kind of FUD. Okay, so is FUD endemic and or worse for software than it is? Because it certainly was born in computing systems.
God,
and I'm sure that like
it feels so easy, doesn't it? Right? Like, it feels so easy to just imagine there were some upstart saying no, we've got that coming. That like that feature or that product that you want. Like, that's in the next release. You do not want to get another vendor in your ecosystem because we're going to do that.
Especially like a new one. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
So it's going to feel so tempting because software feels so kind of infinitely possible, even in a way that like hardware and the wonders of technology or whatever, there are some pesky laws of physics that seem to bound it. Whereas, man, with software, it feels easy.
It feels easy. I also feel that with software, it is, we see almost endemic disruption. Schumpeter's creative destruction seems really endemic in software. And, I think that you can argue that happens for a bunch of different reasons, but there are very few, like very, very few, right? Like kind of, Microsoft and Red Hat, very kind of few persistent software companies. And there are a lot of software companies that make a product that has success, and then they are wiped out by the next thing. And that was proprietary software companies being wiped out by open source, and now it's open source companies being wiped out by their own community, I guess. But I feel that we are constantly like overthrowing the incumbents. And I also feel that like, I wonder if this is part of the challenge of software, where, because we all know that like, look, software is high gross margin, and that's catnip for investors at some level, right?
Totally.
And did you ever ride any of the scooters, like a Lime scooter?
Yeah, totally. I just very quickly, I rode one to the office. That's how I learned that some of these scooters aren't allowed in Emeryville. Because as soon as I crossed San Pablo, the scooter powered down, and I got an alert telling me to walk it back to Oakland. Thank you very much.
It's like, okay, your funeral, pal. I'll walk you back. It's like, you know what? You're not, hey, in Emeryville, you're not going to be thrown into Lake Merritt. I'm trying to save you over here, but like, fine. So I remember the first time I rode a Lime scooter, I'm like, man, I can see this is going to be wild because on the one hand, this is an asset that just makes money. I mean, you've got this capital asset that has no humanity associated with it. If you assume that the software is all written and there's no ops team and everything,
Right.
assume a bunch of things that aren't true. But you have this this zero human labor asset that just sits there and like prints cash. And from an investor perspective, it's got to be like, wow, that's attractive. But then you're like, yeah, but okay, it's also because it's unattended, it is going to be thrown into Lake Merritt. So you've got that whole issue, right? Like you've got you've got to deal with like the theft and the strip downs and everything else. So you got that issue. Then you also have the issue that it's like you're not the only company that's going to see this, and a bunch of other companies are going to see this. And I just felt like the first time I rode a Lime scooter, which was like super early after it happened, I'm like, I can just see it all unfolding. I can see massive amounts of capital funding many different companies going to absolute war with one another, and then the space being wiped out, which I think is more or less what happened.
I think so.
And
another interesting one of this, there are humans involved in terms of charging them. So I don't know if you've seen these folks in vans kind of going around scooping up scooters.
Oh yeah,
because they gotta bring them somewhere to charge them.
Yeah.
And then apparently one of the problems is they are charged in really unsafe ways, like with non-UL certified, although maybe UL is like just FUDding these other chargers or whatever.
That's right. Are you reading that? Did you read that UL think piece in InfoWorld? Like, first of all, you should know that that's not an article.
Where's that disclosure?
That's the UL CTO that wrote that, by the way.
That's right. Big illumination, yeah. But apparently, like stacking all these batteries on top of each other, which creates heat problems and fires and whatever. Anyway, so there are. So yeah, I'm anti-scooter too.
Well, I'm not necessarily. It just like I just realized that this was going to be impossible for capitalists to resist at some level.
Yeah,
in the abstract, and kind of impossible to win. And you had these things that like you were just going to be irresistible, but also going to make it. I didn't see how you could build a persistent business there because I just felt like you were going to get wiped out by it all. And I mean that's more or less what happened. And I mean I think that they'll find some other kind of, but I feel like software's got that same kind of problem where it's like it's irresistible. I mean, but and the kind of the doom of software companies is like slightly different, where you get entrenched, and once you get entrenched, it's like too tempting to effectively sell that to do what Mitchell has done, right? And like, it's like I get it. It's like it's great. Like you get to like fly your admittedly extremely nice aircraft and write like terminal programs. Like I'm not sure that I would do any different if given it's like more power to him. But like Mitchell's not involved in HashiCorp anymore, right? Yeah. And it's been sold, and it's been sold more or less to private equity. I mean, it hasn't been sold to private equity, but like it might as well be. It's been and. It is now in the hands of rent seekers and not interested in really being innovative, more interested in kind of monetizing, and they actually don't care about how few customers they have if they can monetize the hell out of them. And it's kind of like the fate of VMware too, right? VMware in Broadcom's hands, same kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
I mean, I think it shows you how hard an Act 2 is, right? Like, because VMware's Act 1 was terrific. And I'm sure, NSX and some of this other stuff, they had great additional products, but it's hard to keep that innovation cycle going.
Oh, it is really hard. Act 2s are real. And this is where like you have to give, I mean, total respect to Microsoft has had a couple of Act 2s. I mean, they honestly, under the Ballmer era, the company was just kind of like slowly losing altitude. And they found a bunch of different ways, in part because they tacked into open source. They stopped fighting open source. They stopped fighting Linux, and they finally like started actually realizing that like we can actually be open source, not just open source advocates, but real leaders. And I think that's when they really began to turn, is when they really started being a leader with respect to open source. I mean, it's tons of stuff, but TypeScript and VS Code, like a lot, really going back to their dev tools roots. But with an open source spin on everything, and it's been really commercially successful for them. So they had a really good act too. But yeah, you're right that like that second act is really, really, really hard. And it's because you also need to like, it's just hard it's hard for a company not to hand itself over to the rent seekers once it's been successful.
Yeah.
And the rent seekers don't actually, the rent seekers end up creating the resentment that creates the forks and the open source alternatives. And I mean, they create, they sow the seeds of their own disruption by being absolute rent seekers. And I feel like that's the cycle that is just like really locked in to software. It's really hard, it feels like, to get out of that.
Let me try something else with regard to software, which is a very high margin, but also it ossifies very quickly, right? Like or you can build something great that lots of people love, and upstarts can come up and outpace you in part because they only have to build 20% of what you've done. They know what works, they know what doesn't, and they don't have these organizations that have kind of found some local maximum of competency and dysfunction. So it's kind of easier to run some of these folks down.
I think it is. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think then also the high margins, I think, are not unrelated. Folks in the chat are asking like, well, why is software different? And I think that part of the reason it's different is because those margins are high, the costs are low. And you like, once someone has something that does, Adam, as you're saying, kind of like 20% of what you do, but it's the 20% that everyone wants, they can like price that in a way that's very disruptive, often by making it open. And it just ends up being kind of wild. It ends up being kind of locked into disruption. It feels like over and over and over again. I mean, which makes it interesting, I think. I think it makes it good. I think it makes it good for customers and users.
Yeah.
I think that's something we don't really necessarily talk about that frequently, but it's like it's actually a huge win for the people to break rent seekers and to get them disrupted. And it's like, but we have to kind of like the cost that we need to pay for having this kind of this amazing constant bounty of creative destruction is we get this like little FUD text that we've got to go deal with when we're to get us to try to lose our nerve when one of these entrenched players is about to be eaten by economics. Feels like that's
right.
That's right. Right?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it makes sense why they turn to FUD when a new product shows up. I've got my organization that it keeps, can't ship the next feature. In the meantime, these folks I've never heard of have run us down. They tell me, our engineering team says that the best they can do is 6 months from now have something that can compete. So what do I have left? What I have left is, my brand, my incumbency, and I got to just hold on to that for dear life, and with the tools that I have, which are not honorable necessarily, but you do what you can do.
And I guess the question is like, does it work? I feel like it doesn't work in the limit because you can't use fear to prop up inverted economics.
but it doesn't need to work in the limit, and that's the thing that Amdahl taught us, right? Yeah. That IBM didn't need to maintain this fiction that micro-coded processors were better. They didn't have to maintain that fiction for decades or even years, right? It was only enough quarters to put the hurt on Amdahl's business to cause it to be, self-propagating FUD, right? I think their business is shaky, and then their business becomes shaky, and then it becomes something that I can't invest in as a customer, and then they go out of business.
So that is surely true when you're competing against Amdahl, where you've got a company. It's harder though when you're competing against an open source project.
Yeah, good point.
Like OpenTofu can't go out of business, really.
That's right.
And I mean, it's, I guess, like, what are you gonna like FUD them for, being slow on the Estonian locale or something? I don't know. I mean, it's you're having, and I'm so sorry for the good people of Estonia. That was not meant to disparage you at all.
Yeah, we do have listeners in Estonia. I've just checked the numbers. Okay.
Okay. You know what? If we do have listeners in Estonia, I'd actually like them to clear something up for me, because we have neighbors. My dumbass cat. Stay with me. My dumbass cat decided to didn't come in last night because he had wandered into a neighbor's garage that had then closed. So we can't find the cat in the morning. We're kind of freaking out, and we find the cat several houses away in a last name that I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize it was spelled that way. Clearly a Finnish name. And my wife's like, well, it's Estonian. I'm like, well, that's basically the same. I mean, there's a great kinship between Estonians and the Finns. This is what I have to say. This is very controversial in my house this morning. I would like to say that I would say Estonians. Let me know how do you feel about Finns? I say kinship, but you may say rivalry. Let me know. So as you're upset about my disparaging remark about the Estonian locale and OpenTofu, please, in your letters, please include whether you maybe Adam, maybe you know what? I'm actually just going to edit this out. We're actually going to put this back in.
No, it's good. This is going to be its own micro episode. Are you kidding me?
Its own micro episode. Brian weighs in on various nationalities to see this. It's like that episode killed. It got a lot of numbers on that one. I got to tell you. I mean, like they're not happy numbers. I got to.
I've also compiled all of your legal advice too, from what is libel and whether something is obvious from a patentable sense.
Listen,
it does have to be tempting to say to like add features to your now source available product and say, good luck, open source. Like, go chase down that, feature parity or whatever.
That's right. And I think I kind of like larding it up with, larding up these releases. I actually do hope that one of the things that the XZ episode teaches us, and again, that terrific conversation we had with Andres, but I think that, part of that was this getting them to issue a release went out of their comfort level for no other reason than just like, it's time to issue a release. It's like, well, these aren't crops. Like, there's not like a season for it. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to bring in the harvest here. And we can it's actually okay for a project to actually move actually a little slower and with great reliability. That's actually fine. So I would hope that, but I think you're right. It's going to be very tempting for other folks for whom this happens, because we've seen this as well with Redis and Valky, right? Which is another, and Redis, I'm willing to say, looks a lot more like a private equity play, because it's, the original folks are not associated at all with Redis, and Redis, the company, it was another company's name that's kind of renamed itself to Redis, but that has now turned into a hard fork. And Valky, I think Valky is going to. I mean, I don't know, what's your take on Valky?
Can you talk more about Redis? Because I admit that, like, I saw this license change go down, and I can't remember. I think I was on vacation or something, but just insulated myself from it. So, what exactly was it? As simple as that Redis just changed their license, and that spawned another fork?
Yeah, well, so this is the second time they changed the license. So they changed the license for, and whatever it was, like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I can't remember exactly what it was, where they're like, we are, changing the license for all of our modules, but not the core. The core remains unaffected. And it's like, now they're like, actually, the core is affected. You know what? Forget that stuff that we said a couple of years ago. That was just all a bunch of bullshit. So no, actually, the core is affected. And it's so they have now just like change the licensing for Redis. I mean, Redis is effectively all under, and now under this either Busel-like license. I think it's actually the SSPL, but same difference.
Same idea, right?
Same idea. Basically a limited use license. I mean, are you really making me do this? Are you really going to make me? Of course, there is a mad essay piece on this, as you might imagine. The headline, like it's not an op-ed, is Redis versus the $1 trillion cabals. So clearly, you know which side he's on. It's just crazy, and it's like the thing that is, so this is actually kind of a little bit interesting, and I got to say, this piece is not aging real well at all, because there's this kind of idea that, like, well, if the large cloud giants contributed more open source, and I feel like this is not a criticism that I think is well grounded at this point, because I think that there was a time when you could really make that criticism, especially of Amazon, where it's like, hey, you're consuming all this stuff, which has been absolutely essential for your business, and you're not contributing anything back. I don't think that that's fair to say right now. It's certainly not fair to say of Google. Like it's just like flat out like that. It would be that is comical. You can level plenty of accusations. There are plenty of valid criticisms of Google. Google has made a lot of stuff open, and it's stuff that's super important for all of us. So like, just like forget that. So maybe when you say cloud giants, maybe you're not including Google in that. But it's like the reality is AWS has put a bunch of stuff out there, and it's really not fair to AWS to say they haven't put anything out there. But by saying that, like, well, no, this is punishment for you, the $1 trillion cabals, for not open sourcing things. It's like, well, you're actually like, you are now really incentivizing them to contribute to their fork and to contribute to Valky. And this idea, I mean, and this piece by Essay is just like totally upside down, where it's like this idea that, Amazon is like, is strong arming others because they don't want to pay for the cost of this thing. It's like, read the room, man. And Valky, I think, is going to very quickly become dominant. Because I think like, I mean, okay, sorry to just say this, but like what Redis is doing is important, but it's also, I mean, we're not splitting the atom here. You know what I mean? I mean, this is not like, oh my God, Redis, there's so much stuff that's not yet done for Redis to fulfill its vision for itself. That's probably the most charitable way to say it. You know what I mean? It is, It's like, no, it's a key value store, and it's good. And it's like, there's work to be done, I'm sure, but it's like, it's not Valky. I think there's every reason to believe that Valky is going to surpass Redis. And I think that the term Redis is going to be lost to history. I think it's going to be, I think that this is going to be Hudson. I honestly think that Valky is going to be the Jenkins, Let
me try something else on you, Brian, because actually a lot of things you're saying, I'm less familiar with Redis, like I've never used it, but a lot of what you're saying feels familiar with Terraform, right? Like I've been a Terraform user for a long time, and it, again, useful, not splitting the atom, but also maybe both of these technologies, progressed to a level of maturity where, yes, there were still features being added and problems being solved and so forth, but not so many that the primary sponsor was able to reap the benefits for those, and not so many that other folks kind of participating in the community weren't building additional value now on top of that as a foundation. It became such a stable foundation that others felt comfortable building on top of it and extracting or building additional value beyond that. So I wonder if that's part of this life cycle where, when you've got some open source technology, you're unsure of its utility. Then it turns out to be incredibly valuable and incredibly useful and popular and so forth. And it keeps on maturing, but there's this point where it is not done, but there are diminishing returns, significantly diminishing returns, and the value to be added is elsewhere.
No, I think you're exactly right.
And that's when you get that temptation where you say, where the rent seekers, come in, or where you stop seeing the growth. And this is, one of the tools in the tool belt when growth runs down.
I think you're exactly right. And it's like, what you should say is like, hey, congratulations, this is great. Like, that is now sedimented into foundation. And what you need to use is the dividends from that to move to the next layer. You got to move on.
Yeah.
And I think that constant motion is like, you can't sit still. You can't be like, oh no, I actually don't want to move on. I just want to sit here and monetize this. It's like, well, no, you can't do that. That's not going to work, because that's not where the value and the differentiation is anymore. And you've succeeded, and because you've succeeded, you need to move on. And and this is where I got to say, this is like, the semiconductor companies are good at this, right? You don't have a semiconductor company that's like that makes a part, and they're like, hey, like, great, we've succeeded. It's like, no, sorry, like, now we're going to be on a different process, right? Or we're going to be like, you got to move on. You have to get a roadmap. You got to go on to the next thing. You can't sit here and sell a part that's 8 years old and expect to kind of to monetize it. And in software,
That's right.
people do expect to do that. And it's like, and the other problem is like that doesn't totally not work. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you will be able to have 1/100th of your customers and you'll be able to monetize them 10x what you're monetizing today. The problem is that that's a much smaller business.
Right.
And like, but it's a high margin business. And I guess that's what, and so you end up with these kind of forces that do, I think, result in these cycles, these kind of FUD cycles over and over and over again.
This is reminiscent of Sun open sourcing Solaris, arguably much too late. I think that
yes, inarguably,
maybe not arguably, right. But
exactly.
but there's a world where Solaris was open source much earlier, and I don't think that Sun was getting a lot of direct value on Solaris anyway at that point. Would have been a great thing. I've often wondered an alternate history where VMware open source the hypervisor, right? Like
for sure,
took
KVM,
Hyper-V, all this other stuff kind of never happens. And in the meantime, VMware was already building higher level software on top of it. So would that have sedimented their dominance rather than ending up in Broadcom? Or maybe it just would have been in Broadcom earlier, and there's a reason I never went to business school. So
well,
one or the other.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's a really good example where I think that because certainly it feels like they could have opened all of the things that Broadcom is killing right now. You could have actually opened all of those things and you would have delivered more ultimate value because you would have assured that these things it's certainly more value to humanity, but value to humanity is not something that ranks. I don't think that that's very important. This is why you and I are business school flunkouts.
That's right.
We care about this value to humanity thing, and it's like that seems to be like not. I kind of don't understand why not actually. Why that's not on the. You know what I mean? It's like it just feels that isn't the value to humanity. Like, doesn't that feel nice? I guess not. Whatever.
I mean, only when humanity are common stock shareholders, like as a fiduciary.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I guess that's it. I guess
like that portion of humanity. Sure, let's give them all the value.
Right. If you're talking about the humanity of my investors, like yes, and I think it's great, but like I also think you can do right by your investors and do right. I know. Now I'm just talking crazy.
Right.
But
I think the impossible dream.
I think that they absolutely could have opened it, but they didn't. And I think that Sun for sure could have open source earlier, but was never. I mean, I think that happened about as fast as it was going to happen because I think it was so disruptive internally. I think the thing that where things do get interesting, but again, I feel that the world just has a slightly different complexion. I don't know if it's fundamentally different. Is that if there's no AT&T lawsuit right against the BSDs, and that is. Then we talk about like some of the original FUD. I mean, the lawsuit that was hanging over the BSDs made it really hard. It made it really hard. I mean, that's another example of kind of litigation as an arm of FUD that just, this thing could not actually grow until the lawsuit was settled. So I think that and it had a prolonged adverse effect. I do think it's actually important that we've had a real revolution and a flowering of entirely open languages that are unencumbered. Unencumbered VMs and so on, unencumbered runtimes, I think is very important to get because we need to get out from underneath these threats and taxes and so on, and in order to build the kind of the next layer and move up the stack, which ultimately, but people don't, it's work. They'd rather seek the rent. I think.
Yeah, well, and it's also very understandable. How Mitchell started writing Terraform and it succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, and so he didn't really have a plan for as Adam Jacob would counsel, for what the distinction between what's open and what the distinction between enterprise saleable high value products look like. Maybe we're getting smarter as an industry. Maybe open source is becoming more aware of those things from the outset, but I kind of doubt it, in part because I don't think anyone knows what is going to hit and what's going to miss with regard to open source. What's the GitHub project that has 3 likes and 1 dependency, and what's the one that becomes load bearing for the universe? Pretty hard to tell at the outset.
Well, and I also think that like being load bearing for the universe, I think there's been kind of this conventional wisdom that if I build software that's open source that is used by many, many people, I can monetize that directly. And and it will be a high margin, high growth business. And I think that that's tough. It's not impossible, but it's really, really tough.
I don't even know that there are many examples that back that up. I mean, I feel like there's,
Yeah.
my hope now is that folks have realized that there is not that alchemical formula between GitHub stars and cash. I think there was a thesis for a while that like GitHub stars up and to the right equaled an unassailable business. But I think even things like Docker have disabused people of that.
I think it's probably, that's right. And then I think all that kind of that fervor has kind of moved on and is now in the now you're right. Now you got to be an AI startup if you want to get that kind of fervor.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
so what's the future here? Do you think this I mean, FUD continues. I think that feels like
Unabated. Yeah.
that feels like it feels like up there with World War II stressful. Is that FUD will continue?
Yeah.
What do you think the fate will be? Does any of this have any effect on either HashiCorp or OpenTofu? I mean, I think it doesn't matter.
I think it doesn't matter. I think it doesn't matter. I think that I think no. I think like we'll keep on seeing this kind of signaling from whether it's HashiCorp or Redis or folks who are in my opinion, although Matt I say would disagree, in the wrong. That folks who are taking open source products and trying to relicense them under these source available licenses. This is not, they like to use terms like sustainable. This is not sustainable. This is not the path to sustainability for the folks who are building critical infrastructure. I don't know what the path is necessarily, but it can't look like this. And so we're going to keep on seeing these weird emissions. But I guess my optimistic take is maybe we're at the waning edge of this. Like maybe we're going to see, maybe there aren't that many Redises and Terraforms left that are going to go through these kinds of throws. What do you think?
Yeah, you mean you just think that the fire's running out of fuel? That just like
I kind of do. I kind of do. I think there was this whole generation of open source projects in kind of the, I don't know, like mid to late aughts or something like that. That where some of this stuff was less clear and maybe more like later, more sophisticated open source maintainers and starters and companies either didn't like they didn't make these kinds of mistakes, or they thought about it earlier or had better distinction. So yeah, maybe the fire is just running out of fuel, as you say.
And I do wonder about that. I also wonder like how much like escalation. I mean, why am I even saying this? Because I'm just like I'm going to apologize in advance to the OpenTofu folks but I am going to ask, what escalation is left? Like you've already accused them, you HashiCorp have already accused OpenTofu of like stealing your code. When are you going to talk? Oh, you accuse them of like following you home, of like
of compromat do they have to dump?
Compromat, exactly. That's right. Are you going to be like, no? I'm just saying, like, there were I saw the OpenTofu core was like, was looking into my bedroom, or I just don't know what are you going to do? Like, what's next? I just don't know what you can do, how you can kind of continue to escalate, and I don't think you're going to get purchase on any of this. So I think that ultimately, this is going, I mean, to me, this is like, just to go back to like the fear that I sense is like the fear in HashiCorp itself. Clearly, HashiCorp is afraid, and they are probably rightfully afraid because they're probably beginning to hear, I mean, they are probably hearing it from customers. Like they've got their own customers that are probably like, hey, what's going on with OpenTofu? And they're like, oh, hey, well, have you heard that we've, sent them to this?
And they were at my bedroom window just last night. Like, isn't that weird? Like, do you really want to hang out with them?
No, you don't want to hang out with them. Exactly. So I think that I think that this is got to be close to running its course.
Okay, my prediction, my hope. I don't know.
Oh, here we go.
This is my hope is that HashiCorp creates tons of features, just like feature palooza in
Feature
Terraform.
Palooza. Oh yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, feature palooza. Yeah, totally.
That they just try to jam so much shit in there, hoping that something will become vital to their users, and it's like creating a different kind of busy work for OpenTofu, and maybe sort of they feel unchained because previously they maybe had to hold back some features for the closed source enterprise products, and now they don't feel that way anymore, and so they just start jamming in crap, and probably piss off their own users doing it, because there's always some new feature or some new intentional incompatibility because they're trying to like spike stripped the OpenTofu project. That's my low low probability, high amusement prediction.
No, so intentional incompatibility is interesting, right? Because that would be very much a play. That's from the Halloween documents from Microsoft and their FUD. That's the IBM FUD and Amdahl. I mean, that would be like the classic move here would be, we are going to deliberately make these things incompatible.
Yeah.
And
maybe like HCL is the language. So maybe they say, okay, new version of HCL, we're going to provide a update tool, but that update tool produces documents that are not allowed to be run by anything other than Terraform, like weird stuff like that.
Totally. And you get like weird, like we are going to we've got a new HCL update, but it's, it's got patents in it, or there's going to be something like just, it just gets like
That's
super
right.
Baroque and weird. And
yeah.
And again, it's like you can't use that to you can't use that to coerce people forever. Like that's just not gonna work forever. You're gonna have to, even if some of the stuff like works in the short term, it is not gonna work in the long term. And you're gonna actually have to either to accept the fact that this is going to be open, and you're going to, which you'd be wise to do, and go build, go build elsewhere, go build up, or you're gonna succumb to history. I mean, I think that's going to be history's pretty clear about the well, FUD will continue.
Good. That feels like a safe prediction. Low amusement, right? High confidence prediction.
And InfoWorld will not take this article down. I feel this InfoWorld article will be up forever. I just don't feel that these articles are not coming down. These op-eds are not coming down. So,
yeah.
All right. So I'll tell you what's not going to continue forever. So we are we're in this podcast. We'll wrap it up. I promise. So next week we're going to be out for the next 2 weeks. Off for different reasons next week and the week after. So what that means, and I know Adam, I swore I was just going to do this to you or do this for you earlier in the day, but haven't gotten to it exactly why. Sorry, I'm just for Freudian slips all over the place. But our next going to be together on May 13th to talk about How Life Works by Philip Ball. I'm really looking forward to that. Actually, may I read a bit of early fan mail we've gotten on this?
Please, early. Yeah, great. I wasn't aware of any fan mail.
Yeah, let's see here. It's been obvious to me. I picked up a copy of the book just after the XZ podcast and aim to finish it before the book club meeting in May, writes this avid listener. It's been obvious to me for a long time that computation is a bad analogy for biology. We deal in clean abstractions and interfaces. Biology respects none of that. The whole thing is side effects, reaching out in every direction. I'm really enjoying the book. So and goes on with some more delightfully detailed comments, and I'm gonna save the delightfully detailed contents for the next time and maybe I'll get this listener to actually hop up on stage and say them themselves. But this is a technologist who's really enjoying the book. Adam, I don't think you started yet, but you started. You mentioned that you started.
I have started. I have started.
Yeah,
no,
it's really interesting, and And we're going to have Greg Cost on, and I think I'm really looking forward to Greg walking us through. He can explain the stuff that trolls him, or the stuff that is, but I think that there's a lot in there that he's going to be able to give us some additional context
And are we gonna open up a bit for folks who to bring their favorite passages? Yeah, great.
Yes, that'd be great. So bring your passages, bring your questions, and we will. So that's going to be not a week or 2 weeks from now. That is 3 weeks from now. So 3 weeks from today.
From to now.
From to now. Need to read the book. And it'll be great. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be excellent.
Even a Matt Assay op-ed can't ruin our book.
That's right.
So
that's right.
It'll be fun. Alrighty, well, sorry about the FUD, everybody. OpenTofu folks, really sorry that you had to endure it, but I think that you are stronger for it, and I think that folks are seeing that the response from the OpenTofu folks is really, really terrific. So it's much more moderate than you and I are, Adam. They should be applauded for their moderation.
Not saying much, but yes, true.
And it really does not take much to be more moderate than we are on this. But thank you for your moderation, and hopefully everyone gets a chance to read their response as well. And onward. All right, Adam, we'll talk in 3 weeks on how life works.
Looking forward to it.
Great. Talk to you then, everybody.